Timothy Egan is an award-winning writer and a wonderful Irish storyteller. Enjoy this two-part presentation, Mr. Egan discussing his new book, The Immortal Irishman, at the American Irish Historical Society. The room was a bit dark, but his words sparkled brightly. This is a story for all of us to appreciate, whether you are Irish or not.
Well, thank you. This is just fantastic. What a lovely crowd. And isn't this a great space? How did they let the Irish in here? I love it. Thank you to the American Irish Historical Society for opening up this wonderful space for us to tell our stories and to tell this story, a story through which I think you can see almost the entire arc of Irish American history. Some people call March the Irish Holy Month, and there's a lot of blarney and leprechauns and paddywhackery. There's also a really serious story, which is the burden of memory. And Thomas More really felt like he carried the burden of memory. The burden is that story. The burden is that history. The burden is all the generations who came before him. And the great thing about More is he, in his own life, has that, not only just the burden, but he has that story. I was strolling around the Montana capital in Helena, Montana. For those of you who have ever been there, you know there's this giant equestrian statue. You can't miss it. You can't walk into the Capitol. It's huge. With a gentleman with his sword thrust into the air facing the Rocky Mountains, you can see it from afar. And at the base, at the pedestal, are these fighting words from 1848. This speech that this gentleman on the horse gave in Dublin in 1848. Here's a man who was friends with both Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, and he was friends with Daniel O'Connell, the great liberator. He knew Chief Red Cloud of the Sioux, and he knew Horace Greeley, the great New Yorker. He probably knew every contemporary mid-century American. He was at one point the most prominent Irish American. And yet at the time he died, in very mysterious circumstances, he was a footnote of history. He knew William Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman did not like him. The Irish fought for Sherman. He just didn't like the things they did in between battles, which is a lot of fiddle playing, a lot of storytelling. They staged steeplechase races in between Civil War battles. There's theater, great St. Patty's Day parties. And Sherman never liked any of that, so they were at odds. More shaped history on three continents. Australia, Europe, the United States, and North America. Now let's go back and put his life into the context of Ireland. Most of you here, well maybe, most of them would think, know that for 7 centuries to be Irish in Ireland was to be in a place that you could not call your own. To be in a place where everything had been done to eliminate your culture. It was a crime for a long time to own property. It was a crime to practice your religion in public. It was a crime to speak your language Gaelic in public. It was a crime to own a horse worth more than 5 pounds sterling. At one point, they outlawed your sport, hurling. And so, when the Irish went to Newfoundland, the first colony in the British Empire, one of the first things they did was establish a hurling club. It was all these things that people do as a people, all these things that give human beings dignity, all these things that give us a sense of place and self had been taken away from them. So, this is what the 18th century Lord Chancellor of Ireland said. The law does not suppose any such person to exist as an Irish Roman Catholic, nor can any such person draw a breath without the Crown's permission. So with the plantations of Ireland, which was, when the Scots were brought to the area and people were kicked off the land, and with the Cromwell invasion, in which 40,000 people were sent off to slavery, primarily in Barbados, but in different parts of the Caribbean, there to work the sugarcane fields. There was a great story in Irish American magazine a few months ago about the descendants of those original Cromwellian slaves who were sent to Barbados long time ago. What they had was basically a template for apartheid, a template for delegitimizing a people. And at one point they had an actual wall around the 4 counties of Ireland where the Anglo-Norman ascendancy lived, and they called this the Pale. from the Latin word palace. It was an actual wall in place. Inside the wall were the Anglo-Normans, pretty much taken over the country. Outside, all the other counties were where the Irish lived. So to this day, if you say, "Sir, that is beyond the pale," that's where it came from. The pale was drawn around the four counties. And so in sum, what they did was, over these 800 almost years, with the Statutes of Kilkenny, they took language, sports, and culture. With the penal laws, they took religion. They criminalized the faith of 80% of the residents of Ireland. Now, of course, Rome was corrupt. Rome was deceitful. Rome was unenlightened at a time when Europe was in an Enlightenment siege. And people always ask me, why did the Irish cling to the Roman Catholicism? For the same reason that hurling became the national sport. For the same reason that you see the harp on the Guinness bottle, because they went after harpists, they outlawed the harp for a while. Queen Elizabeth famously said, "Hang the harpist wherever they can be found." For that same reason, religion was a way for a conquered people to remain defiantly Irish. Now, one more thing on the context, and I'll get to more. When he's coming of age, 1820s, 1830s, the British Empire is coming of age as well. This would be the most powerful empire on earth at its time. And at its peak, the Union Jack flew over 1/4 of the land mass of this planet. 1/4. The most troublesome part of that empire was barely 30 miles away. They said the Irish were ungovernable. They used to constantly say this in Parliament: what do we do about Ireland? These people are ungovernable. So at different times during this siege, the Brits had a larger garrison in Dublin than they ever had in India, the subcontinent, which they by and large subdued, with less of a garrison than Dublin. Frederick Douglass toured Ireland in the mid-1840s, just as the famine was starting to happen. He was surprised, this ex-slave, this great orator and newspaperman. He said, "I find myself treated as a man, not as a color." But he also said, I had never seen a more subject people except for the American slaves. He'd never seen people in more misery. Alex de Tocqueville said the same thing when he toured Ireland about the same time. So Mar is of wealth. Mar is from a big merchant family that had gone to Newfoundland, made a lot of money in the cod trade, and then came back and repurchased the land that Cromwell had taken from them. They had the biggest house on the river in Waterford. You can still see it. It's a hotel, Mar's home. You can go up to his bedroom where Mar lived in the big house on the river Sur. And he had a gilded life ahead of him. He went to this school called Stonyhurst, which looks exactly like downtown. By the way, Mar goes to Stonyhurst, comes home. The world is his oyster. He just has to take over his father's business. He's got this big house. He's got wealth and everything ahead of him. He could be in Parliament if he renounced his faith. But at the same time, the Great Famine hits, or as they call it in Ireland, the Great Hunger. And this is what radicalizes him. He joins a group of people in Dublin called the Young Ireland Movement. They're brilliant men and women, and there were a lot of women. One of his lovers was a poet named Speranza. So there's this educated, elite, attractive group of people who are not starving to death, who are seeing all of Ireland starve to death. And they start this Young Ireland Revolution. But what chance do they have? You're talking, they call them the Scarecrow Irish. 1 million people die in about 4 years' time. 1 million people die. And what the Young Ireland people and Mars people realized, that scholars didn't really put into the history books until much later, was that the famine is ostensibly about potato crop, about this mush. When you go and dig up the poor spores that came and ruined the crop of most of the peasants of Ireland, who could live, by the way, on an acre. A family of 4 could live for a year on their potatoes. But at the same time, 1 million people are dying. At the same time as little children are curling up in ditches with green stains on their teeth while they chew on grass. At the same time that people are going to the poorhouses and we see families in heaps dying. At the same time that people are being evicted, kicked out of their grass huts because they can't even harvest enough to pay their rent. Ireland has plenty of food. They had grain they had barley, they had oats, they had pork, and more beef was exported from the British Empire at the peak of the famine than any other part of the British Empire. So Mars people see this, and they say close the ports, stop food raised by Irish hands from going out of Irish mouths. Feed it to the people. You can stop. At one point, the Choctaw Indian Nation sent a ship of corn to come into Dublin Harbor, and the Brits for a while wouldn't let it land. They actually passed the hat in Calcutta on behalf of the starving Irish. So Mar and his compadres in Young Ireland see this as a crime. They see this as an agricultural crisis, but also a crime, because they're letting people starve. They're not trying to kill them, but they're letting people starve. When they later open these soup kitchens, in some cases you have to renounce your faith to get in and have your 700 calories. To this day you can say someone who's a trader, they've taken the soup, or they're a super, because that was the price of going in there. When the British Medical Journal examined the contents that this French chef had concocted for the starving Irish, he said it was soup quackery with barely 400 calories that actually made people sicker. So that was the one thing. Now the person in charge of alleviating the famine was a man named Lord Trevelyan. And he wrote in private correspondence, a lot of this didn't come out till later, that he saw the hand of God. That families were too big, there were too many people. The death of 1 million Irish, his explanation of that was it was the cure. That's exactly what he called it. So if you go to Quinnipiac University, and I recommend if you're ever up there, go into the Great Famine Museum, run by the inexhaustible Christine Keneally. And there's a portrait, like one of these portraits, I'm sure all these guys were hanged on, of Lord Trevelyan. And beneath the portrait of the man, the Brits in charge with alleviating the famine, it says, wanted for crimes against humanity. So that's what radicalizes Mar. And they start this uprising in 1848. And you can imagine how that fared. Here's just a bunch of poets and journalists, a bunch of philosophers and kids, a bunch of people who were, just filled with a sense of possibility and outrage. And it's sonnets against swords. It's words of journalism against the Royal Navy, which often let the Irish know they could level Dublin in an afternoon if they wanted to. Just bring those ships into harbor. That's all it took. The Brits had the mightiest navy in the world. So the revolution fails. It's an uprising, really. It fails miserably. Mar and all his people are caught. He is, after a very quick trial, in which he gives a wonderful speech, and he says, it's still, a lot of Irish school children can recite this speech. He says basically that what I did is not a crime, but the crimes of English. The crimes of England explain what I did. The great famine. Look at what's happened. He always called it for the rest of his life. When he'd give these speeches before 5,000 people in Boston, he said, we must never forget the skeletons at the feast. The skeletons at the feast is his burden of memory. Those are the 1 million who died. So he's sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, and his remains disposed of as Her Majesty shall see fit. Her Majesty is Queen Victoria. She is about the same age as Thomas More. More spends basically a year waiting to be hanged, drawn, and his body parts thrown into the streets of London, which is what they did to the rebels of 1798. But he's lively. He's writing poetry. He's having visitors. Journalists that go visit him can't believe what this guy is just burst of that. He goes, well, if I die, I'll die for Ireland. At least my life had some impact. He's 25 years old. Global outrage from the Irish diaspora, from the United States, France, Spain, with the Wild Geese War, and Queen Victoria, Her Gracious Majesty, commutes the sentence. No longer hanged, drawn, and quartered. New sentence. Lifetime banishment to the island of Tasmania. Now you know that Australia was this audacious social construct. England tried to make a penitentiary out of the continent. And so, they sent 160,000 people there under some sentence. Most of it was petty crimes. Stealing a loaf of bread, stealing shoes. People were sent to Australia in the founding days of Australia. But Tasmania is a special place in hell. Tasmania is where they sent the political prisoners. So you had Mar, you had Smith O'Brien, you had Patrick McManus, you had all these 7 leading young islanders, the most brilliant class of islanders of their day, suddenly spending the rest of their life in Tasmania. And this is what the British governor called this place. It is a den of thieves, it is a cave of robbers, it is a cage of unclean burns, it's an isthmus between earth and hell. Mar is lonely. Mar is the greatest orator of his day, and he talks to his dog. He's the greatest speechifier of his day, and he shouts into this distance. Now, there was a really weird thing during the Victorian age that if you were a gentleman, and you gave your gentleman word of honor that you would not escape, you would not be in a cage where you were lashed with cat of nine tails, which happened to people in certain prisons. You were free to roam within your district. So he had a 7 mile by 7 mile district where he's supposed to spend the rest of his life. Next to him is one of his buddies, O'Doherty, who's got a 7 mile by 7 mile district. Mar ingeniously found out there was a little stream that connected the two of them and a footbridge. So they arranged to have lunch every Friday on that footbridge. They called it the Irish Feast, and the governor was furious because he couldn't kick him out. This is the one place they weren't in violation. But he wants to make his dent in history. He writes these letters where he said, I'm 14,000 miles from Ireland. He's more than half the distance of the circumference of the earth. It took almost 9 months to get to this place. And he's all alone. And he just misses company. He misses his lovers. He misses Ireland. He misses most of all, his sense that he's going to have a place in this world. He keeps saying, I want to make a mark. So after 2 years, he escapes.
Timothy Egan is an award-winning writer and a wonderful Irish storyteller. Enjoy this two-part presentation, Mr. Egan discussing his new book, The Immortal Irishman, at the American Irish Historical Society. The room was a bit dark, but his words sparkled brightly. This is a story for all of us to appreciate, whether you are Irish or not.